Good morning, everyone. I'm John McCutcheon, the President and CEO of EBR Systems, and I'm happy to be able to share the EBR story with all of you here today. The EBR focuses on pacemakers, the pacemaker market, and most people are aware of pacemakers. You probably have some family member or relative who has a pacemaker. The first pacemaker was implanted in 1958, so they've been around for 65 years now. And they've evolved over time, and they've all consisted of a box or a battery that has leads or wires that go into the heart. And the advancements since 1958 have been around the size of the implant. They've gotten smaller and smaller. They've gotten more intelligent as electronics have matured. The indications have expanded from slow heart rate to patients that are at risk of sudden cardiac death, and now on to heart failure. But all of them, until recently, have relied on these leads that go into the heart, and those have always been a problem. So it's great when it works, but sometimes those leads can fail. They can fracture, they can migrate, they can get infected. Sometimes the leads are difficult to place. And so they've always been known to be suboptimal, and there's been a lot of work going into perfecting the leads. But up until recently, it hasn't been possible to eliminate those leads altogether. And that's where EBR systems come in. We have the first leadless technology that can be placed in the left ventricle to treat patients with heart failure. Now, the leadless pacemaker market is just starting to take off. It's dominated at the moment by Medtronic and Abbott. They both have leadless pacemakers that go in the right ventricle to treat patients with slow or regular heartbeats. Boston Scientific, as you can see in the middle of those three, has one in development, but it's not currently on the market. The only company that has anything that is in development or is on the horizon for treating patients that need left ventricle leadless pacing is EBR Systems. So the other leadless pacemakers are rather large compared at least to the EBR Systems pacemaker that goes in the left ventricle. And the sizes you see here are somewhat to scale as best as we could. The EBR system, wide CRT system, is about 0.05 cc's in volume. That's about the size of a grain of rice. The leadless pacemakers that you see on the right that go into the right ventricle, those are all about the size of a small battery, about 1 cc in volume. So much, much too big to be put in the left ventricle. The problem there would be they could generate clots, thrombus, and interfere with the structures of the left ventricle. So only EBR can treat the left ventricle. That means we can treat patients with the heart failure where the left ventricle gets bigger and bigger, gets distended. And the goal is to reverse that and make that left ventricle smaller. And the other great thing is that these systems are complementary. We can work in conjunction with these leadless pacemakers that go on the right to deliver what's called biventricular pacing, where they have, say, a Medtronic Micra leadless pacemaker on the right side, and we can pair with that with the WISE system on the left to have completely leadless biventricular pacing. And that's a very, very new thing and a breakthrough in this clinical arena. Now, we recently presented our clinical data of our pivotal trial, and this was at the HRS Heart Rhythm Society meeting in May of this last year. And we met our primary endpoints, which means we're now on path to getting FDA approval. And we didn't just meet them, we really exceeded them in a significant way. So as I mentioned before, the goal of treating patients with heart failure is to reverse the expansion of their left ventricle. We want to shrink the left ventricle. And the primary efficacy endpoint was a reduction in left ventricular volume. And that's an acronym called LVESV. We reduced that by 16.4%. And it's very meaningful because a clinically relevant reduction is on the order of about 9%. It's been shown that if you can reduce that heart volume in patients with heart failure by 9% or more, that they have greater survival and reduction in heart failure symptoms and problems. And so very, very significant at a statistical significance of 0.003. Also, our freedom from complications at a p-value of 0.001, highly significant and clinically meaningful. And so what's important about these data, again, it's the foundation for our impending PMA submission and ultimately our FDA approval that will lead to our commercialization. For commercialization strategy, once we have FDA approval, it's a very focused initial targeted strategy. We'll launch in the US because it's the largest medical device market, has the highest ASPs, and it's also a very focused market. So the top 250 centers roughly do about 50% of all the volume. And so we don't need to target every center in the US in order to drive significant revenue. And we'll do a phased rollout. We'll start with a small sales force, do an initial launch, and then expand further and further from there as we demonstrate traction and clinical success. And we'll initially target our clinical sites that were from the pivotal study. So we'll be going after or targeting surgeons and physicians that already have experience with the device, understand how to use it, how to roll it out, and really believe in the clinical utility of this. It's a very high clinical need, unmet clinical need. So we're not competing head to head with any existing technologies. Our initial indications are for patients that have failed conventional CRT or conventional lead-based systems. Therefore, there's no direct competition. These are patients that have very little, if no other options, and therefore there's not a high clinical hurdle for us to address these patients. There's no hospital adoption barriers. There's no capital equipment, no long-term contracts that need to be signed. And we're going to have a very, very high average selling price in the US with our CMS coverage that we get with this new technology add-on payment that we benefit from because of the breakthrough device designation status that was conferred upon us by the FDA. We already have our base sales force in place. We have a skeleton crew at the moment, but we'll expand those as we get closer and closer to commercialization. And these are folks that help drive cases during the pivotal trial, and they're skilled in both sales, but also in the clinical proctoring of our system, and will facilitate that rollout. So upcoming milestones, we had a big 2023. We've already hit a number of milestones. Probably the most important was what I mentioned in terms of the headline data and the meeting our primary endpoints at the Heart Rhythm Society meeting. We've also released some sub-analysis that supports the primary analysis, showing that EBR system-wide system is safe and effective for these patients and highly beneficial. In 2024, we'll submit the final PMA module. I didn't mention this earlier, but we're doing a modular format, meaning that we submit the PMA in pieces or modules so that some of the questions can be addressed early on, and that way the final module goes in and there's a lot more likelihood that it'll go through in an expeditious manner and not be delayed. And ultimately, that'll get us to FDA approval, where we will be doing our commercial launch in 2025. Beyond that, we'll go into other non-US markets. In particular, we'll be targeting Australia and many countries in Western Europe. We'll also be looking to expand our indications and expand the technology. We continue to invest in R&D. One example is a rechargeable battery. Our current battery is replaced every 4 years or so, and it's a minor surgical intervention, but still it would be much better for the patients if the battery lasted the life of the patient, and a rechargeable battery can do so, and it's also much smaller. And our initial market research shows that this would be very well received by patients and clinicians. So one of the R&D projects that we have underway. So with that, I'll wrap up the presentation, and I want to thank everybody for your attention. And it's been a pleasure speaking to you.